The Whittaker story has taken another unexpected turn. After years of documenting the family, supporting them financially, helping with repairs, vehicles, and other necessities, Mark from Soft White Underbelly has now spoken publicly about what happened to his relationship with the Whittaker family and why he no longer expects to make videos with them. And this time, his comments are especially significant because Mark isn't a newcomer to the story. According to his own account, he has known the Whittakers for decades and has been documenting them for years. His relationship with the family predates the controversy that later surrounded them. So when he talks about the changes that occurred, he's speaking from a very different position than someone who discovered the family only after they became an internet phenomenon. In an August 2026 update, Mark was asked about the Whittakers, and his response painted a picture of a relationship that had gradually changed before eventually disappearing altogether. Mark explained that he had been financially supporting the family consistently, while only producing a small number of videos with them each year. He said there were years when he filmed only 2 or 3 videos. But the important point was that the limited number of videos didn't mean the relationship had ended. According to Mark, he continued helping financially whenever the family needed assistance. Cars needed repairs? He helped. The family needed something? He helped. There were other expenses? He said he continued supporting them. That distinction is important because the public often associates support with visible content. But financial support doesn't necessarily appear on camera. A viewer may see one video every few months and assume nothing is happening behind the scenes. According to Mark, however, his involvement continued even when the cameras weren't rolling. And eventually, he made a decision. He told Betty that if the family wanted to work with other people who were making videos with them, he would step back. Mark said he wasn't interested in forcing the family to choose him. He essentially told them that if they wanted to do things differently, he would allow them to do so. That decision would later become extremely significant, because the people who came into the picture afterward became central to one of the most controversial periods in the Whittaker family's history. And this is where the story becomes difficult to untangle. There are allegations from various commentators about what happened during that period. There are also competing accounts from people involved. Some claims remain disputed. Some events have been publicly documented. Others remain matters of interpretation. So we have to separate what people believe from what can actually be established. But one thing isn't really disputed. The Whittaker family experienced enormous changes. The family members became separated. Their living arrangements changed. Their relationship with the online audience changed. And Mark's relationship with them changed as well. In his August 2026 update, Mark described the outcome as deeply unfortunate. He said the family had eventually been separated and that he was unable to visit them. He explained that when he attempted to contact them, he was told that nobody, including family members, was being allowed to see them. Whether every detail surrounding those restrictions is understood publicly is another question. But from Mark's perspective, the practical result was simple. The family he had known for years was no longer together in the way he remembered them. And that is what makes his comments so significant. Mark wasn't simply talking about a YouTube series ending. He was talking about the disappearance of a relationship that had existed for decades. For years, viewers had watched the Whittakers through Mark's camera. They saw their personalities. They saw their routines. They saw the inside of their home. They saw the family interacting. And most importantly, viewers became familiar with individual members of the family. Timmy, Ray, Lorraine, Betty, Larry. The names became familiar to millions of people. But Mark's description of the family was remarkably simple. He remembered them as happy. He said that whenever he visited, they were generally in good spirits. He acknowledged that their home was not particularly clean, but he argued that the condition of the house didn't necessarily mean the family was unhappy. That distinction is at the heart of the debate, because there are two different questions. Was the family's living environment ideal? And were the people living there happy? Those questions don't necessarily have the same answer. A home can be messy while the people inside are emotionally connected. A home can be clean while the people inside are unhappy. And Mark's argument was essentially that the Whittakers had a way of life that they were accustomed to. He didn't describe their living conditions as perfect. He described them as familiar. He also emphasized that, in his experience, the family had not appeared chronically ill because of the environment. Again, that's Mark's personal account, not a medical assessment. But it explains why he believed that intervention should have been approached carefully. Mark said that if professional assistance had been needed, he would have been willing to pay for a full-time caretaker. That's one of the most revealing statements in the entire update, because it suggests that, from his perspective, there was another possible solution. Instead of completely changing the family's lives, he believed assistance could have been brought into the home. A caretaker, additional support, repairs, better living conditions, whatever was necessary to make the house safer while allowing the family to remain together. Whether that would actually have satisfied authorities is impossible to know. We can't assume that such an arrangement would have been legally or practically sufficient. But Mark's statement does reveal how he viewed the situation. He believed the family could have received help without necessarily being separated. And that belief becomes even more important when he describes how the family eventually ended up, because the contrast is striking. According to Mark, the family was once together. Now, they were separated. According to Mark, they were once consistently cheerful during his visits. Now, he had no direct way of knowing how they were doing. And according to Mark, the relationship that had existed between him and the family was effectively over. That doesn't necessarily mean Mark believes everything was perfect before. He doesn't. In fact, he openly acknowledged the family's problems. But he believed there was value in preserving the family unit. And that is where his comments intersect with the larger controversy. Because once the family became the center of intense online attention, the story stopped being only about the Whittakers. It became about the people around them: creators, viewers, supporters, critics, fundraisers, and competing interpretations of what was best for the family. The more people became involved, the more complicated the situation became. And eventually, the family became almost impossible to separate from the internet ecosystem surrounding them. That's when the question of money became unavoidable. Mark has publicly discussed the financial support he provided over the years. According to the information presented in the source material, that support included a major fundraiser, assistance with home repairs, vehicles, repairs, and additional expenses. The exact totals and accounting of every dollar should not simply be assumed from commentary. But the broader point is clear. Mark wasn't just filming. He says he was financially helping the family for years. And that makes his decision to step away even more consequential. Because if the family loses a long-term supporter, the impact isn't limited to YouTube. It can affect their ability to handle emergencies, vehicle problems, housing problems, unexpected expenses, basic necessities. That's why some viewers have described Mark as a lifeline. But even that description needs caution. A family shouldn't have to depend entirely on one private individual. Long-term stability ideally comes from sustainable systems, proper care, and reliable support networks. Still, the loss of a trusted supporter can be significant. And that's exactly what appears to have happened. Mark's latest comments, therefore, don't simply reopen an old YouTube story. They raise a much larger question. What happens when an internet-famous family becomes dependent on the people documenting them? Who protects the family when the creators disagree? Who controls the money? Who decides what content gets produced? Who decides what information becomes public? And perhaps most importantly, who gets to decide what is actually best for the people at the center of the story? Those questions don't have simple answers. And as we move into the next part of the story, that's exactly where the Whittaker controversy becomes much more complicated. Because Mark's comments don't just describe what happened. They also provide a glimpse into what might have been lost: a long-running relationship, a source of financial support, and perhaps most importantly, a connection between the Whittakers and someone who had known them long before millions of strangers discovered their story. And now that relationship appears to be gone, the question is why, and whether it could ever be restored. To understand why Mark's latest comments have created so much discussion, you have to go back before the controversy, long before the accusations, long before the live streams, long before competing creators began debating the family. The Whittakers were already part of Mark's world. According to his account, he had known them for decades. He began documenting them on Soft White Underbelly years before the events that eventually transformed the story into a massive online controversy. For viewers, Mark became the person through whom many people first encountered the family. That matters, because when millions of people form an emotional connection to people they've never met, the person holding the camera becomes an important part of how that audience understands the story. Mark wasn't simply recording random moments. He was introducing viewers to the family. And over time, viewers began developing their own memories of them. Timmy became recognizable. Ray became recognizable. Lorraine became recognizable. Betty became recognizable. People remembered their voices, their habits, their expressions, and the little details that made them individuals. That is why the later separation of the family affected viewers so deeply. It wasn't just that a channel stopped uploading. It was that the people viewers had become emotionally invested and were suddenly no longer appearing together. And then came the questions. What happened? Why did things change? Who was responsible? Could anything have been done differently? Those questions remain controversial. Different people have offered different explanations. Some believe intervention was necessary. Others believe the intervention caused unnecessary harm. Some believe the family needed greater protection. Others believe the family's autonomy and existing relationships were not given enough weight. The truth may ultimately be more complicated than either side suggests, because vulnerable adults can require protection while still deserving dignity, autonomy, and meaningful relationships. Those principles can collide, and when they do, there are no easy answers. Mark's perspective appears to emphasize preservation. He repeatedly described the family as happy. He acknowledged that their house wasn't particularly clean, but he didn't believe that automatically meant the family needed to be removed from their home. Instead, he said he would have preferred to arrange professional help. That's a significant distinction. He wasn't saying nothing should change. He was saying change didn't necessarily have to mean separation. Again, we cannot know whether authorities would have accepted such an arrangement, and we shouldn't pretend that an outsider can make that determination without seeing the full case. But it does explain why Mark reacted differently from some of the people who later became involved. His relationship with the Whittakers had been built over years. He understood their routines. He knew their personalities. He had seen how they behaved when cameras weren't necessarily the center of attention. That long-term familiarity gave him a different perspective, but it also created another problem. The more creators entered the story, the more difficult it became to maintain a single narrative. Every creator brought their own audience. Every audience brought its own assumptions. Every video generated new interpretations. And every disagreement became content. That's how internet controversies grow. A private disagreement becomes a live stream. The live stream becomes a clip. The clip becomes a reaction video. The reaction video becomes another accusation. Then another creator responds. And eventually, nobody is talking about the original issue anymore. They're talking about each other. The Whittaker story became vulnerable to exactly this cycle. The family became content. Their lives became content. Their relationships became content. And eventually, the arguments surrounding them became content too. That's one of the most important lessons from this entire controversy. When vulnerable people become the subject of a massive online audience, there is a constant temptation to reveal more. More photos, more stories, more private details, more dramatic moments, because dramatic content attracts attention. But attention isn't necessarily the same thing as help. And that distinction becomes especially important when the people involved may not fully understand the scale of the audience watching them. Mark's long-term relationship gives his latest statement additional weight in the public discussion because he isn't describing the family based solely on a handful of viral moments. He says he knew them long before the current controversy. He also says that his support continued even when he wasn't filming. That point is important because it challenges one common assumption about documentary creators. People often assume that if the camera isn't running, the relationship doesn't exist. But according to Mark, the opposite was true. The videos were only a small part of his involvement. The financial support continued. The communication continued. The assistance continued. And when the family needed something, he says he tried to help. That history makes the ending especially painful. Mark's latest comment suggests that he no longer sees a realistic path to continuing the same relationship. He described the Whittaker story as essentially finished from his perspective, not because he stopped caring, but because circumstances changed. The family became separated. Access disappeared. And the relationship he once had with them was no longer available. That is a very different ending from simply deciding to stop making videos. It sounds more like losing contact with people you've known for years. And that's why viewers have reacted so strongly. Some believe Mark could have prevented what happened. Others believe the family needed intervention regardless of who was filming them. Some blame individual creators. Others blame the broader system. And some believe responsibility is distributed across many people. That's probably the most reasonable starting point, because complicated situations rarely have one single cause. There can be failures by individuals, failures in communication, poor decisions, misunderstandings, systemic problems, and unintended consequences. At the same time, Mark's comments raise a question about the promises made to the family. Whenever creators enter the lives of vulnerable people, expectations can become enormous. Promises about money, promises about housing, promises about opportunities, promises about a better future. But promises are not the same as results. That's another reason financial transparency matters. If people publicly raise money or generate substantial revenue connected to someone's story, the audience deserves clarity about what happened to those funds. And the people at the center of the story deserve even more clarity. The question shouldn't be, which creator do you like? It should be, what system best protects the people involved? That's a much harder question. It also moves the discussion away from internet personalities and toward the actual issue. The Whittakers are real people. Their lives continue even when the cameras stop. Their needs don't disappear because a video isn't uploaded. Their relationships don't become less important because an audience moves on to another story. And that's something worth remembering when discussing the controversy. There is also another uncomfortable reality. The more famous the family became, the more valuable their story became to content creators. That creates a potential conflict. A creator may genuinely care about the family while simultaneously benefiting financially from content about them. Those two things can exist at the same time. Good intentions don't automatically eliminate conflicts of interest. That's why boundaries are important. What should be filmed? What should remain private? Who controls the footage? Who controls the revenue? Who gives consent? What happens when the family members disagree? And what happens when creators disagree with one another? These are questions that should ideally be answered before a controversy begins. Because once millions of viewers are involved, it becomes much harder to fix the problem afterward. And that may be one of the biggest lessons from Mark's latest update. The Whittaker story demonstrates how quickly a small documentary relationship can become an enormous public ecosystem. A family, a filmmaker, then another filmmaker, then another, then donors, then reaction channels, then critics, then live streams, then legal questions, and eventually the original relationship can become almost impossible to recognize. Yet beneath all of that remains the same family. A family that, according to Mark, once spent their days together, laughing and living in a familiar environment. Today, they are separated. Whatever the reasons, that's the reality viewers are now confronting. And the question isn't simply whether someone was right or wrong. The more important question is what happens next. Can the family rebuild relationships? Can they maintain meaningful contact? Can they receive adequate care? Can they retain dignity and privacy? Can supporters help without turning the family into permanent online content? And can the people who became part of the story finally recognize that the story is about the Whittakers, not about them? Those questions remain unanswered. And that brings us to the most important part of Mark's statement, the future. Because while he says the relationship may be over, he also made something very clear. He still cares about the family. He still wishes them well. And he still hopes they are okay. That may sound simple, but after everything that has happened, perhaps simplicity is exactly what the story needs. Not another argument. Not another dramatic live stream. Not another round of accusations. Just people asking whether the Whittakers are safe, supported, respected, and able to live with as much dignity and connection as possible. The most striking part of Mark's August 2026 update may not be what he said about the past. It may be what his comments reveal about the future. Because according to Mark, the chapter involving the Whittaker family is essentially over. For years, he had been able to visit them. He could sit with them. He could film them. He could help them financially. He could see how they were doing. Now he says that access is gone. And that changes everything. For the audience, it means the familiar Whittaker videos may have ended. For Mark, it means losing contact with people he had known for decades. And for the family, it means living with circumstances that have changed dramatically. That's why the story deserves something more thoughtful than another internet argument. There are real people behind the controversy. People who have no control over the way millions of strangers discuss them online. People whose private lives became public entertainment. People whose relationships became part of a worldwide conversation. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Did the attention ultimately help them? Or did the attention eventually become part of the problem? There is no simple answer. Mark's history suggests that the attention brought genuine benefits. He says he helped with housing. He helped with vehicles. He helped with repairs. He provided money. He raised funds. He remained involved for years. Those are tangible forms of assistance. At the same time, the later controversy demonstrates the risks of turning vulnerable people's lives into internet content. Once a story becomes profitable, emotional, and highly competitive, incentives can change. A creator may want more views. Another may want to expose something. Another may want to defend the family. Another may want to challenge the first creator. And the audience becomes the judge. But the family remains at the center. That's the dangerous part. Because every argument creates another wave of attention. And every wave of attention creates another opportunity for someone to monetize the story. This doesn't mean every creator involved had bad intentions. It means the system itself creates complicated incentives. That's why transparency and boundaries matter. If money is involved, document it. If agreements exist, make them clear. If vulnerable adults are involved, protect their privacy. If professional intervention is necessary, use qualified professionals. And if content is being produced, remember that a person's dignity matters more than a thumbnail. Those principles should apply regardless of which side someone supports. The latest update also forces viewers to confront something else: the difference between help and dependency. Mark says he supported the Whittakers for years. That support may have been enormously valuable. But ideally, a family should have access to multiple forms of reliable support rather than depending on a single individual. A private donor can disappear. A creator can move on. A channel can be demonetized. A fundraiser can end. An online audience can lose interest. Sustainable care requires something more stable. That's especially true when vulnerable adults are involved. The goal should not simply be to make their lives better for a few months. The goal should be stability, safety, continuity, and dignity. The Whittaker controversy shows what can happen when those things are not clearly established. Another major issue is the difference between what viewers see and what actually happens behind the scenes. Audiences see edited videos. They see live streams. They see clips. They hear stories. But they rarely see the entire picture. That means every creator has to be careful about claiming certainty. A person watching a 20-minute video may feel like they know someone, but they don't. They know 20 minutes. That distinction is critical. It applies to Mark. It applies to Patrick. It applies to Eric. It applies to every creator who has ever documented the Whittakers. And it applies to viewers too. We should be willing to say, "I don't know." Those three words are often missing from internet controversies. Instead, people say, "I know exactly what happened." But sometimes nobody outside the people directly involved knows exactly what happened. That's why the most responsible way to examine Mark's latest comments is to treat them as one important perspective within a much larger story. His account tells us how he remembers the relationship. It tells us what he believes he would have done differently. It tells us how he feels about the family's separation. But it doesn't automatically establish every disputed allegation surrounding the controversy. That's something viewers should remember. The same standard should apply to everyone. If a claim is made against one person, ask for evidence. If another person makes a claim in response, ask for evidence there too. Don't accept something merely because it fits the narrative you already believe. That is how misinformation spreads. And the Whittaker story has generated plenty of narratives. Some portray one creator as the hero. Others portray another as the villain. But real life is rarely that simple. People can make good decisions and bad decisions. People can genuinely care about someone and still make mistakes. People can help someone financially while also benefiting from their story. People can believe they're doing the right thing and still cause unintended consequences. Understanding that complexity doesn't weaken the story. It makes the analysis stronger. And perhaps that's what the Whittaker family deserves most now. Not another exaggerated narrative. Not another round of internet warfare. But careful attention to what can actually help them. If they're receiving professional care, is that care appropriate? Are they safe? Are their individual needs being met? Can family relationships be maintained where appropriate? Are their rights being respected? Are their finances protected? And most importantly, are they being treated as people rather than as content? Those questions should matter more than who wins the argument online. Mark's comments also contain a reminder about what the family once represented to viewers. He remembered them as happy. He remembered them laughing. He remembered them together. Whatever disagreements existed about their living conditions, he believed there was something worth preserving. That doesn't mean their former circumstances were perfect. It means that happiness and safety both matter. The ideal solution should never be choosing one while completely sacrificing the other. A clean environment matters. Physical safety matters. Medical care matters. But so do relationships. Familiarity matters. Emotional stability matters. Human dignity matters. The challenge is finding a way to protect all of those things at the same time. And that's where professional systems should come in. Not internet personalities. Not reaction channels. Not audiences. Professionals. People with the training, authority, and responsibility to assess the situation properly. Because when a family's future depends on viral videos and online personalities, something has already gone wrong. The internet can raise awareness. It can provide financial support. It can connect people, but it should never become the substitute for a proper care system. And perhaps that is the most important lesson from this entire story. The Whittaker family became famous because strangers cared about them. That's not inherently a bad thing. In fact, that attention brought them meaningful assistance. But attention has a cost. Once millions of people become invested, privacy becomes harder. Boundaries become harder. And every decision becomes content. The challenge now is finding a way to care without continuing the cycle of exploitation. If Mark's latest comments are anything to go by, the old relationship between the family and the Soft White Underbelly channel may be over. But that doesn't mean people have to stop caring. It simply means the form of that care may need to change. Maybe the next chapter shouldn't be another viral series. Maybe it shouldn't be another creator competition. Maybe it should be quieter, more private, more respectful, and more focused on the actual people involved. Because at the end of the day, the Whittaker family doesn't need to win an internet argument. They need stability. They need care. They need protection. And, where possible, they need connection with the people they love. That's what should matter. Mark's August 2026 update doesn't answer every question. It doesn't settle every disagreement. It doesn't prove every allegation made by commentators. But it does give viewers an important piece of the story. A longtime supporter says the relationship he once had with the family has effectively disappeared. He says he still cares about them. He says he wishes he could have done more. And he believes there may have been ways to provide assistance without completely separating the family. Whether history ultimately proves his assessment correct is something we may never know. But one thing is certain, the Whittaker story isn't simply about YouTube anymore. It's about what happens when vulnerable people become the center of an enormous online ecosystem. It's about money. It's about trust. It's about privacy. It's about responsibility. And it's about the consequences that can follow when too many people become involved without a clear understanding of where the boundaries should be. So perhaps the final question isn't, who was the hero? Or, who was the villain? Perhaps the better question is much simpler. After all the videos, all the money, all the arguments, all the promises, and all the attention, are the Whittakers better off? That's the question that should remain at the center of the conversation. And if the answer isn't clear, then maybe the story isn't finished after all. Because the cameras may have stopped. The channels may have moved on. The creators may continue arguing. But the Whittakers are still living their lives. And their lives matter long after the internet moves on to its next story. That should be the lesson we take from Mark's latest update. Not another opportunity to attack someone. Not another reason to celebrate someone else. But a reminder that behind every viral story are real human beings. And when those human beings are vulnerable, the responsibility to treat them with dignity should always come before the desire for another view, another click, or another viral moment. The Whittaker story has already changed dramatically. Perhaps the next chapter should be about giving the family something the internet rarely provides: peace.